day I chose not to let anything win but my drive to get me to the top.
Frank Lee made the beat.
What it do, KTTeeV? This is KT, and I'm coming at you live with another episode of the Daily K Podcast. And on today's episode, we have the CEO of Career and Recovery Resources. How you doing today, Miss Kelly Young?
I am doing fabulous. As you can tell, I'm in my office, getting some work done. I actually find the week before the holidays is great because everybody leaves, and I actually get work done, not things that I'm like half typing, half doing. So I'm feeling pretty good. And thank you so much for having me on.
Oh man, it is my pleasure to be able to talk about just all of the stuff, awesome stuff that you're doing here in the city of Houston. So just thank you for coming on. Mm-hmm. So before we get into things, I always like to do just a check-in, wellness check. So how have you been during the pandemic, and how are you staying safe?
I've been incredibly lucky. So we have, in the organization, we've actually stayed open all the time throughout COVID because part of our services are essential services. And so for, grace of God, good hygiene, not really sure. I'm going to put it all into one big, loving grace that I've gotten, that I have not gotten sick. And it have been pretty lucky in terms of just dealing with stress. I mean, it's kind of easy to forget how much privilege and how much luck you actually have when you run an organization. I'm not the one who's going to be out there having to struggle to figure a job, find a job or whatever, but my struggle has been making sure I could keep people employed, keep the organization running, and actually try to end stronger, because next year's really going to be the test for fundraising around nonprofits for sure. And none of my family, they've been incredibly lucky that I haven't had family members affected. So I just, I'm one of those that I think for whatever reason, my timing worked out well.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
I understand what you mean about the fundraising. I was able to MC the trivia night for a Houston Parks Board, and so that was so much fun, but at the end of the day it was still all about fundraising, and just trying to make that so as you talked about, you were nominated through the Community Heroes, and it was because of your work in keeping everything open, and just the work, just share what you do in the community. Like I said, the Violence Against Women, the AIDS Foundation. So in Career and Recovery Resources, I know that you all focus on 4 core programs. What are those core programs, and how is it going during the pandemic?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. I think one of the things to note is that right now our program is just to serve whoever comes in through the door and get them what they need. I think that was our take on it when we got started. So our structure of our organization really was to provide employment services. And we have a specialized program for people who are deaf and hard of hearing. We have a program for veterans, and then we do outpatient drug and alcohol substance use treatment. And so, it's kind of this weird, like, how do you get all these together? And it's like, well, because they're all barriers to a dignified and self-sustaining life if they get out of control, or if you just are struggling with homelessness or an inability to get a job. And so the focus has always been on this organization to remove barriers. And so when COVID came, well, that's your greatest barrier, right? This was the thing where everybody had to stay home and everybody had to take care, and they absolutely should. The problem is that for a lot of people who are right on the edge, this just pushed them over. And we knew that there had to be a place. So if I'm struggling with homelessness and I'm calling somebody and then that's going to their house, so they might call me back or they might not or whatever, it wasn't going to work. That people had to walk through a door and see a person and sit down and get that process going. And then I think we had an advantage because we have a really nice facility where if somebody came in, they actually could sit in another office, pick up a phone, dial the person next door who could pick up a phone. So, social distancing can happen even in social services where you protect people. I think there was a commitment from the beginning of the people who work here. So it's great that I wanted to stay open, but it only stays open if the team shows up. And the core team that I have, that was their main goal. It was how do we can keep ourselves safe. We know how to do all that, but how are we available to the people we're supposed to serve? So I got lucky that I had 50 people who were willing to sort of gamble this a little bit with me and say, okay, well, together as a team, we can figure this out and make a commitment to show up. And when we've seen things get, a little out of balance, we serve people coming out of the TDCJ system, Texas Department of Criminal Justice, so out of the prisons. And around July, we started to see a lot of people come out with staying with people who had COVID or COVID symptomology. So we had to go back to virtual groups because we knew we couldn't contain 10 to 12 people safely in a group. So we went to Zoom, but we kept our intakes and our individual counseling as face-to-face. Because these are individuals coming out of prison. They don't have, they have to talk to somebody. They have to learn how to use Zoom. They may not even have a phone. They're living with family and relatives, and now you're on a substance use call with 10 other people. So, we've tried to meter it as best we could, but libraries aren't open. We were running into a problem where we were housing veterans in hotels. So there was some money left that was freed up through some grants. Sorry, my phone is ringing. Somebody wants to set an appointment. To make sure that people could get safe and off the street. So we were housing people in hotels. And one of the issues we ran into is that people didn't have IDs. And so hotels were like, well, I'm not going to take them. So I literally called a hotel and I was like, you will take my ID. I have D&O insurance. I can be covered for liability issues. The check is made out in my name. So put this person in a hotel room. But it opened up this whole issue, which is that if you don't have an ID, you can't get into anything. And so out of that, we started working with restorative justice because we were starting to do some voting within the jails and said, okay, we'll come and do ID searches for our individuals here. So Tuesdays and Thursdays, people can come and get their IDs, and it's amazing how many people just don't even know how to do that. Another example is if you want to get into housing and you're a veteran or you have any income through Social Security, you need your current award letter. Well, the Social Security office hasn't awarded current award letters because they're not working. So, these kinds of things that you're like, yeah, so every step they take is just another barrier. So we're like, well, we got to figure out how to fix that because we're not going to just keep turning people away without some kind of answer. Sorry, I kind of went long-winded on that, but those are examples of just these little tiny things that I think anybody you talk to in social services will say, we have talked about this for years. These are not new issues. They were exacerbated by the pandemic. We have talked about them and acted like they're fixed and put a Band-Aid on it and sort of talk it through and make a bunch of cliche sentences about it. But the truth of the matter is the pandemic showed all of the holes in the safety net.
Yeah, I agree. That's for education as well. You get to see those pieces of who are the people who can access the curriculum at home and who are the people who simply can't afford to, so they're not being educated. So that is a struggle that we dealt with as well. I want to back up some because the way you are innovative, the connections, the know-how doesn't come like overnight. So how long have you been doing this? As far as a little background on you, and when did you realize that you would just live and have all this weight on your shoulders as your life's work?
Well, it's funny. I was thinking about it because I was thinking about when I started, and I was lucky. I grew up in Eugene, Oregon, and I went to kind of an alternative grade school talking about education. And part of their basic curriculum is that you had to go and serve somewhere else. And so we were right by the Pearl S. Buck School. And so for an hour and a half every week, we would go down and help kids with disability, play with them and do games and different things like that. So I think I was introduced to the idea that when you can, you serve. That's what you should be doing. And then I remember being in junior high, and there was a program called, it was called being a people tutor. And it was the same thing. So people with physical disabilities, teaching them how to play sports, because I was an athlete. So getting to do that. And then, so it was always sort of just there. And it's when I do a good meditation, one of the things that always rises into my consciousness is my ultimate value is service. It has never changed. It hasn't gone away. And so out of high school, when I was working on my undergraduate degree, I paid my way through school. So it took me 8 years. So I worked. I worked at a shelter for abused children, and I worked with emotionally disturbed kids. And I did that for quite a while. And then I found that probably working with children was not my thing. Love them, loved working with them. The emotional toll on me was not something I could really do. And so then I started working I moved to Houston. I was living in Oregon at the time. I moved to Houston and I worked in a food stamp office for a year. And everybody should work in the food stamp office for a year. It's the best learning experience about people and how we create systems and processes that are not useful in some ways and misunderstood in other ways, right? So it's two balances to it. And then I started working at the Women's Center, and I was the manager of counseling services, and I ran groups for survivors of rape and domestic violence. Then I was the VP there for 8 years. And then I left there and I became an executive director at a small organization, the Women's Health Organization, that was basically rebuilt their curriculum around girls and building resiliency, and they still use that today. And I got recruited from there to go to AIDS Foundation. At the heart of all of the work I've done, you can plug in almost any of the types of groups I've worked with. What I know I'm good at is letting the people who really like to do that direct work, the counseling, the case management, whatever, that they have an organization and a culture that values that understands that the only barriers you have are the ones that you decide to place in front of yourself. It doesn't mean you're going to solve everything, but as long as my literal attitude is, yeah, but what could we do about that? Yeah, but what could we do about that? And at some point, they all just walk out of my office. They're like, I'm sick of you. You make me mad. Right. And part of it is, I developed a training exercise where we took 8 venues of what it's like to walk through, if you're a sexual assault survivor, what it's like to walk through all of the different systems. And you'd have 2 cards, so you could choose to go to the police or you could choose not to. And it really helped people understand that experiential piece of none of this is easy. You think it is because you aren't in it. And you're like, well, I would go to the police. Okay, well, if you didn't, or if you did, you might find out that didn't turn out quite how you thought it would. So innovation to this is, if the question is, yeah, but what else could we be doing? Then you constantly have to be creating something in response. When I was doing HIV/AIDS work, we were building out the strategy. One of the things that I talked about over and over again, and we kind of got known for at the time, was a Southern approach to HIV and AIDS, because all the interventions that came down were from San Francisco, Chicago, Washington, D.C., and New York. Well, that is not the South. The South is really, really different than that. And those were 4 places that had huge public health systems. New York City itself spent $10 million a year on HIV prevention. The city of Houston spends 0. So that alone is a major moment of innovation. Okay, so what is a Southern approach? You can't translate all this into what we do. And so it was much more grassroots. It was finding unique ways in the arts to try to tell this story. And then in terms of the work that I do now, I think honestly what it is a true reflection and a truth telling about, do we want to continue to run systems and structures and processes that leave people out of the system and pretend that charity will solve the second chances, or do we actually want to be a healthy, complete, dignified society? Because you can't decide either or. It's kind of got to be an and. And so my struggle now is really about telling people, you keep talking about giving people these second chances, but you don't want to do what it's going to take. And you keep talking about making success for people, but you're not willing to see that we're going to fail 1,000,000 times before we succeed. And how do we speak truth to that in a way that doesn't deter people from joining, but also can we just be honest about it? And stop sort of pretending that these things are working, because they really aren't.
Well, I think that'll do it for the podcast. No, awesome message. Thank you for that. Because like you said, we really have to realize in 2021 will be that divider on which way we go, the fork in the road. Are we going to do something about it or not?
Well, and the interesting thing is, I don't know if you've ever read Paulo Freire. It's the pedagogy of oppression, and he was a Brazilian professor, and it's a long time ago. But one of the things I loved about it, because it was the structure of popular education, and one of the things I loved about what he said is you can be naive and try to go back to what you were, or you can be critical and move forward. And I think we're at a point where there's enough motivation, enough drive, enough frustration, enough fed upness, I don't know what it is, that maybe we can continue to be critical and not go back to the naive. Because naive will give us comfort, right? I can go back to what it was and I'll feel comfortable there. The problem is then we just recreate the same thing. What if we were really critical about it and said, guess what? This really is the time to address this. If you cannot see structural racism, or structural sexism for that matter, I don't know where you've been living. And if you don't want to buy into the idea of structural racism, then you at least have to buy into the idea of process that's racist or sexist or whatever, because it was born out of people's perceptions that said somebody is more than the other. So whether you want to couch it in that way, which I think a lot of people get really uncomfortable because then they have to admit you actually have racist or sexist beliefs, right? What if we just also had the conversation that you can tell by the processes of who gets dropped out of the process over and over and over again, to recognize that it doesn't work. And so what is at the root of that? And the processes for people who are homeless, who have substance use issues, who have employment histories that are sketchy because, they worked for people who discriminated, or they didn't have the right skill set, or they weren't well educated, they didn't get access to the same education needed. There has to be a recognition of that, because you see them drop out of the process over and over and over again.
And wow, that just gives me a lot of background on like the AIDS work. I'm pretty sure you've seen so much of that happening within that sector, even the women's sector, I guess, but it was still the same thing over and over, the same people. Right. Yes. And so you just hope that. Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all these processes were set up but if you pay attention to the ones that keep falling into the river, right, you have to keep pulling them out at the end. Then you start to look at it and go, okay, so what has to change systemically? What has to change purely from a rules perspective, right? Some of this doesn't have to be legislation. It can be a rules change within the way somebody does something. And then how is it that, so like what I find interesting about HIV and AIDS work is that the group that really pushed forward in the 90s, 80s, and 90s, they literally created a whole different system. They said, if you are not going to care for us, if you are not going to be our healthcare providers, if you're not going to do that, we will create this whole other system, which is great. The problem is at some point you have to integrate that, because otherwise you're still outside of the process that works for most. And so, that work in watching individuals who really just said, we have to do this differently. I think about it in people may dislike or like charter schools or whatnot, but it's the same concept, which is if you will not allow me to be in the status quo process, I have got to come up with something else. I can't survive without that, and so it's just an interesting thing. And I think when I worked with women, it was the same thing. I want to get out of a marriage. The criminal justice system doesn't always work to my advantage. So what are the processes that you have to do? I think we're at a point where we're really having to integrate. We can't create a separate process when you have a pandemic.
You cannot.
Nope.
And so
we are all engaged.
Thinking about the people who need those services. I know you talked about a lot of people coming out of jail. What other ways? Can I just come in off the street and say I'm tired and I need services, or how does that work? Is there qualification for it?
So all the programs have different qualifications. One of the things I would suggest, yeah, absolutely, just come in if you need to do that. But probably the first and best thing to do is to call on the phone, because we may not have the best resource, and we're going to try to hook you up first that way versus having to take an extra trip to do it. The other thing is that in most of our systems, you have to engage in another system. So a lot of people do not understand how the homeless system works in Houston. So you can come in and you might be homeless. I can't place you in a place to live right now. You enter an entire coordinated access system that puts you on a list. So, you're fine to come down. We will assess you. We will try to do the best we can, but we can't place you, even if we had an open bed in one of our programs. It's a process. What I tell people is if you come in or you call, first and foremost, I know this sounds dumb, please have a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen or a lipstick. I don't care what it is, but some, coal, that makes no difference, because people consistently think that they remember and are going to remember what you've told them, and you won't. And because it's going to be a ton of information. The second thing is it's always going to take longer than you think it is, and you need to be prepared for way longer period of time. So, if you think it's going to take a half hour because you've scheduled some other things, you have to take other things, that may not, you just need to know what will get done in a half hour. And these are things that the individual can do coming in, right? The other thing is realizing that you're going to tell people a bunch of really personal information, and they don't necessarily want to know it, but they have to know it. And you're going to have to tell very complex parts of your life that if you're not honest and direct about, you're going to get the wrong resourcing. We don't care what you've done in your life or who you are in your life or any of that stuff. We want to make sure that you leave with something. We're not sitting in our offices judging about it. We just aren't. And so, but it's hard to sit in front of somebody and tell people about your drug use, or that you're out of jail because you stole or you beat somebody or whatever it is. But you did that. It's done. Now where are we going? And that's more important. And I think the other thing is to, you're certainly more than welcome to go on the website, because you actually can sign up for a direct appointment there. But we stayed open for the purpose of being able to have people come in. We served 600 people in the last 6 months in our computer lab. Because we have it open from 10 to 3 and it's socially distanced. So if you need to come in and just kind of work on some stuff, we have that available for people. But I just pick up the phone and call. Somebody here will help you. Oh, that's the last thing. Whoever you talk to, get their name. And it's not because you're going to tell on them. It's because a lot of times, if you remember that, then let's say you talk to Kelly, which sometimes people will talk to me. My number is out with the parole officers as being the contact for getting into substance use. I'm not, but but they can call me and I get on the phone and I talk to them, and I always tell them that you talk to Kelly, so that if they call back and something gets lost in translation, they can say, well, I talked to Kelly, and that person can call me. So those are just some really good tips about how to work through systems that are not user-friendly. The last thing I would remind everybody is that you might be the 5th or 6th person, and although we're professionals and we should be able to maintain ourselves throughout the entire day, we all are also living with COVID, and these are individuals who are choosing to show up to work knowing that they're putting themselves at risk. The last person who came in could have yelled and screamed at the person. People are frustrated. And so if you can come in with an understanding that that is also a human being sitting across from you, that can be much more useful than getting mad at them because the system isn't, or the processes aren't working.
Great information. So I look forward to sharing that. Now, this is one of the final questions before we start landing this plane.
All right.
6 o'clock right now. Mm-hmm. My word for 2021 in my life is balance. So with all of the things that you have going on, with all the weight of listening to other people's problems, and helping them fix them, how do you find that balance for you? Or going forward, what would be some of the ways you plan on?
Well, I hate to say that I'm a little cliche, but I will own it. I actually am a fairly regular practice of meditation, and partly because somebody described me once that the way my brain seems to work is like I'm a scattered dot graph that hasn't made any connections. And so, so I'm like a Pollock, like I'm just all these things happening at once. And I know I have to slow down and give myself time to digest every little dot that I've seen out there and all these things and say, how do these synthesize into something? It may just be nothing, but just getting to that no thing in my brain. That piece with meditation in particular, I call it being behind the eyeballs, where you are sitting in the deepest sense of your consciousness and there's just nothing there. So the way to do it is to say, well, who am I? And then you can't answer it with any of your thinking thoughts. So you can't say, I think I'm, or I am, or any of that. And you have this one clarity moment of just being. So I practice that a lot. It helps me. I find that the clearer I get about my focus, who am I trying to serve? What am I trying to do for them? Where are those, but what else can we do kind of moments? That is my driving balance. It's how I feel good. It's when I'm not doing any of that stuff and I kind of get into worry and wallow and feeling like a victim to the circumstances. That's when I'm super out of balance, because the truth of the matter is I've got a healthy family. I've got a paycheck. I've got interesting work. I have had multiple opportunities of privilege throughout my entire life. So all of this is not as bad as I want to make it be at any given moment. So feeling sorry for myself is, that's usually when I have to kind of kick myself in the butt and be like, really? I mean, this is a pretty glorious world. There's a tremendous amount of grace all the time. Grace is always present, right? You just have to decide to find it. I sleep a lot. I think that people don't sleep enough. I think they feel like it makes them lazy or it makes them seem disconnected. And what I would tell you is that our psyches and our bodies unconsciously are focused on fighting a virus, whether you're thinking about it or not, and that's going to wear you out. So really making sure that you're resting as much as your body is telling you. Because if you think about it, like for me, the last 6 months, every day I walk into work thinking I have to protect myself against a virus. I have to protect 50 people against it. I wear a mask. I have, masks. All this stuff, and that wears on your ability to feel healthy. And the second piece is that you start to feel an exhaustion that you didn't really plan on. So sleep. Yes. Occasional glass of wine is not a bad thing either.
Hey, never hurt nobody.
No.
Yeah, I agree though. Just even at the school, and things are happening so fast with us because we allow kids to really come back and forth all school year. And so on top of making sure that I'm working on processes to keep everyone safe, keeping myself safe, and then it was also bringing in kids, putting out kids that are going back virtual, and it was tiring, so I understand totally where you're coming from. So thank you for those kind words, information there. Sleep is the number one, so that's another word for 2021. Sleep.
Yes.
Yeah. So how do they find you to donate, to see what you need? If somebody needs the services, just please give us the contact information.
Yeah, and the easiest way, so we try to make everything online so it's super easy for people. So just careerinrecovery.org. Just go on our website and click donate, or click programs. It'll give some information, or click calendar and sign up for classes or for an appointment. And, or call the main number. I mean, you're more than welcome to call just to find out what we need and what is important to do, which is 713-754-7000. And if you happen to be in the neighborhood and you're wearing a mask, please do not make us ask, wear your mask. That's all we want. You can certainly stop by our main address, which is 2525 San Jacinto. We're down Midtown, so it's pretty easy to get to, off the train and off the bus.
So now, what sport did you play?
I played volleyball and basketball, and I ran track. I was a hurdler.
Yeah. Okay, I can see that. I can see that. I can see it when you stand.
I
Yeah.
got what people, they're like, she is, how do they describe me? Gangly. They got long limbs. I'm like one of those air things that stand outside. You know, you float
Yes. That's cool.
If you need to rent me for a party, I could just be out there like this.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love the conversation. I love your sense of humor, you know, because that is very important, especially, you know, in that line of work that you're in. You gotta some kind of way keep that. So thank you for your time today. Like, I know it's real busy. You're probably about to get back to work. So just thank you for taking some time to really get this out so that we can help change more lives. Let's go for 600 more in the next 6 months.
That would be lovely. And I hope we figure out a way to partner with each other. We're always looking for opportunities. Like I said, I'm the scattered dot graph, and you might be here and I might be here, but I feel like we are here for some reason, right?
Yes.
So
that's it.
Please make sure that you stay in touch with me and figure out how we can be of help and service to you as well.
Yeah, and I will say, speaking of that, I was able to talk to Volunteer Houston, the nonprofit leaders forum. And I was able to talk to all those guys. Like I say, that's how I ended up with the Houston Parks Board Trivia Night. So I've been doing a lot of work with them. But I remember it was one day we needed a refrigerator. And so I was able to call someone to help get them a refrigerator for Meals on Wheels. So just any way that I can help, please let me know. And I'm here.
All right. Well, I feel like we're friends. Much love and grace and respect to you this holiday season.
Same to
and
you.
Anything I can do for you, please just reach out.
That'll work. That'll do it.
All
I'll
right.
talk to you soon.
All right.
All right. This is KT for KTTeeV signing out. 100.